Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 10. My guest for this episode is Cynthia Johnston Turner. Before we begin, I need to ask a favor. If you enjoy this podcast, would you please go to iTunes and give it a rating? This will help spread the word and bring the show to more listeners. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Mark.
We seem to be together now.
Yes, I'm here.
A little bit of technical problems on my end. I'm so sorry about that. So, Cindy, would you mind introducing yourself for the listener?
Well, I just heard myself being introduced. I'm still Cynthia Johnston Turner, and I'm at the University of Georgia.
You want to tell me a little bit about sort of what you do at the university?
Yes, I just finished up my third year there. I am professor of music and director of bands, and I'm area chair of the conducting and ensembles department. And I'm also artistic director of Rote Hund Musik, which is the contemporary chamber ensemble.
And how long have you been at Georgia?
This is my third year.
Okay. And you were at Ithaca before that, if I recall?
Yeah, I was at Cornell University in Ithaca.
Oh, okay. So you must know Chris Stark.
Very well. Chris is a very good friend, yeah, and a wonderful composer.
Yes, he is. I met Chris, I guess 2 years ago when he got the job at Washington University here in St. Louis.
Yeah, we just had him come down. We did Velocity Meadows with Reed Message on oboe, and we've just decided that we're going to release it as a single, thinking, hey man, if Beyonce can do it, why can't we do it? So I'm thinking, I have thought for a while that CDs are really already an ancient technology. The only reason I think we make them anymore is so that we can have them in our trunk and hand them out to our colleagues, or put them in our tenure file and all that sort of stuff. But it just, I don't even have a CD player in my computer anymore, so I'm not sure why we would continue to make them. So we're going to release it right to iTunes and see how it goes.
I think that's a good idea, actually. What's your origin story? How did you get into music and your start?
Well, let's see. I figured out when I failed biology class in high school, or I almost failed, that I wasn't going to be a veterinarian. And I really, wanted to do that. But I also really, really loved music and band. And in fact, that was where my sort of family and my sense of community was. I hung out in the band room with, a core group of friends any free time that I had in high school. And that sort of almost extracurricular aspect of music and music making really was important to me as a teenager. And then I had the opportunity to do some teaching, and that was a game changer for me. I just loved when that kid's light went on. It was just such a thrill. And so there it is. And I went to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and did a Bachelor in Performance and Music Ed. And then I went off to Switzerland, and I taught for a year there. I taught choir, and I taught computers in French.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I took French literature classes, and I came back, and I got a job teaching, among other things, beginning band just outside of Toronto. And then I landed the head of a music program in a high school outside of Toronto. And that's where I thought I would live and die, because I loved it. I love high school. And then I met my now husband, who moved out to British Columbia. And long story short, I went out there and did a master's in a year with Jerry King at the University of Victoria. Wonderful conductor, wonderful teacher. And then I was hungry. And I had the typical, I'm not good enough, talented enough, smart enough, imposter syndrome stuff. So I couldn't do a doctorate.
Yeah.
But I started investigating that, and I got offers from some very crazy and special places, and Eastman was the best one and closest to home, and the rest, as they say, is history. Although I started as a PhD in music ed there, and but I kept following Don Hunsberger around like a puppy until he finally, kicked me off his ankle and said, give her something to conduct, and I did, and it was Al Fresco by Husa, who was in the audience. I have no idea how it went because I was so terrified. But afterwards, Don said, you should be a conductor, and that was that.
Wow. That's such an empowering moment.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it was, Domine Nobis Patri. Like he knighted me. He was like, And so I made the switch, and I haven't looked back.
Yeah, I want to talk about the comment you made about hanging out in the band room, because I think people who aren't necessarily, and I'll use the term with love, band geeks, don't quite understand that. But to me, it gives a sense of belonging to a lot of kids. I remember the same thing, hanging out at lunchtime in the band room with my friends or with the director, and he would just talk to me about things, and it was really, really important for me as a young person.
It's extremely important, and I mean, I don't think it's unique to band, except that there's this element of the mystical. When you create something as an individual and part of a group, and this is greater than me and even us, and the hairs on the back of your neck and all that sort of stuff. We hear about it in drum corps, we hear about it in scouts and Girl Guides, we hear about it in church. It's important to us, I think, as humans, to have that sense of self within a sense of community. It's a bit of a paradox, but I've come to embrace that. It's not about me, and it's all about me.
Right.
I can't be part of this relationship if I don't have an understanding of me. And at the same time, it's bigger than all of us, Yeah,
absolutely.
Very cool paradox. So I think that's, and as a teenager, my God.
Yeah.
Everything is about you, and you're just trying to figure it out, and it's so important at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what band provides a lot of students who are into music.
Right.
You played in your high school band. What's your instrument?
I was a saxophone clarinet player. I haven't really picked it up seriously. I pick it up unseriously now. But yeah, that was my major.
Yeah, I'm the same way. The trumpet is there for me. I still play in the community band. In fact, I just was at rehearsal last night. But I'm pretty bad relative to other people who got degrees in music. But that's okay. I do other things.
It's okay. Yeah, I used to be sad about it. It's a bit like when I'm training for a race and then I take a couple of weeks off, and it's like I've never run in my life. It just takes too long to get back to where you were. So
yeah, I think the fella next to me, who is a community member who plays really well, I think he's just sort of bemused by me.
Yeah, yeah, he humors you. Yeah.
I think so. So you mentioned imposter syndrome, and that's something that I struggle with a lot. I just woke up this morning with a dream that someone on Facebook had left a review of my music, said this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And so that's how my morning began this morning.
You've had quite a morning.
Well, no, it's a little bit. But no, I think that's something that as a composer, I struggle with that every day. What am I doing? Am I good enough?
Where to begin on that? I think that so-called imposter syndrome is just human nature to, of self-esteem versus confidence, versus role models versus what am I doing? Is this the right calling? There's all sorts of elements to that imposter syndrome, and I think artists feel it the most, but I'm not sure about that. I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg ever wakes up with imposter syndrome, but I bet he does.
Yeah, I bet he does too.
Yeah, so I think it's just something that's just human nature, and again, accepting it and moving on. But that takes the paradox of that is that it takes a certain confidence. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. I call it the razor's edge. You have to live the balance between being slightly arrogant so that you can kind of move forward, yet humble enough that you're presentable.
Right on. And then we're back to ego, right? We're back to that small e and big E ego, and managing it and keeping it in check and tapping into it when you need it and discarding it when it's not helpful.
Yeah, so you mentioned when I first contacted you about this, you listened to Mark Stickney's interview, and he and I talked about fear in the ensemble. And I think that's partly tied up with this imposter syndrome.
This is going to sound trite, but I think it helps by being as authentic as I possibly can be. I don't think there is ever a rehearsal that I have walked into where I haven't felt incredibly vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's okay. I think if you walk into rehearsal feeling, super cocky, that's when things go south, at least for me.
Right.
The fear in the ensemble, that's tricky and depends on the situation. Whether you're doing say an honor band where you're just getting to know the students, your fellow humans, or where I am at Georgia, where there's doctorate and masters in performance on their instruments who have their own set of fears. They don't want to sound bad in front of their mates in the studio and all that sort of stuff. And in honor bands, they don't want to sound bad to the stranger, that's sitting in front of them or behind them. And that's difficult. One of the things that we talk about at Georgia and also in honor bands is it's okay to make mistakes and risk and all that sort of stuff. Easy to say, but not necessarily easy to put into practice. I know one thing: every time I make a mistake on the podium, which is often enough, I will acknowledge it, say I'm sorry, and say, well, nobody's bleeding. Let's carry on.
Right.
And by modeling that, look, I made a mistake. I acknowledge it. No big deal. You still respect me. Let's carry on. That they can see that. Oh well, if she can do it, maybe I can do it. I also think that we can tap into student leadership a little bit more than we do. The marching band and drum corps does this really well, right? They have student leadership, in sections and drum majors and all that sort of stuff, and student leadership training. And then we don't necessarily bring it into the rehearsal hall, where we ask our section leaders to be part of the culture of non-fear and risk-taking. Literally leaning over and giving a thumbs up when somebody makes a mistake, or when somebody, you calf your foot in the air when something goes well. Asking your student leaders to be part of a culture of it's okay to make mistakes and take risks. One of the things I say to students all the time is, hey, I'm never going to look at you. I'm never going to say to you, Mark, you're being way too musical right now. You better cut that out. And they're just offering that opportunity to take risks.
And that's important.
I think it's crucial. I think that's art, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, so this leads me to two different questions. One, I want to circle back to when you talked about being on the podium and showing your vulnerability. How do you reconcile this for, say, the middle school teacher, where in a middle school setting, one of the things you have to do is maintain a certain level of authority with the students?
I agree with that to a certain extent. I mean, I think that there's a difference between respect and discipline.
Yes.
A lot of this can be cultivated outside of the classroom as well. I remember a quote-unquote discipline problem kid I had when I taught middle school. And I had this brilliant idea of asking him to come to my office and be part of a little scheme that I was doing. It was a little experiment, and I needed him to act out in class. Anyway, it was something where he and I were conspiring.
Yeah.
To do something that his peers weren't aware of. It was just he and I. And that immediately changed how that particular student and I were in a relationship, and things got better. By authentic, I mean, and vulnerable, I mean being yourself. And, that's really hard.
It is.
It's really hard to, I remember Don Hunsberger said that to me at Eastman when I was having issues. I mean, I was so nervous when I was at Eastman when I was first gotten on that box. I couldn't hear anything. It's the first thing that, happens. Your ears shut down. I was just not myself. And he said, just be yourself. And it's really a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
It took me like a year and a half to figure it out.
Absolutely. And I think that's also very true. When I first started teaching at the middle school level, my first year was rough. It took the third year to kind of find that balance where I did exactly what you said, where I could be authentic to the students and where they could feel like they could trust me and I could trust them. But there's a pretty steep learning curve there.
Yeah. And every classroom is different. Every relationship is different. But I'm not saying I have all the answers, but it does take time to figure that out. At the same time, you're figuring out you, right?
Right, and that's part of it too. And most teachers start their first job when they're 23, 24.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. They don't even know what boundaries are in a lot of cases, right?
To a certain extent, that's very true.
It takes a long time, but I think it's, as you say, the balance of balance is so important, and figuring out where your boundaries are as a teacher, as an educator, but also being your truest self really matters a lot.
Right. So you mentioned that you have obviously outstanding musicians at the University of Georgia, but what does it look like? What does the program look like?
Well, we have 5 concert bands, and of course the Redcoat Marching Band. We march around 430 students out there. And do you want to hear just about the wind ensemble or the whole program, or?
With 5 concert bands, how are those conducted? Do you have graduate students that do those? Do you have other faculty? And then the programming, just sort of the general gist of the program.
Well, the wind ensemble, which is what I do, is populated by masters, doctorates, and undergrads in performance, maybe a couple of music education majors. We're on a rotation system, which is something that I did when I got there. When I got there, the top students picked orchestra or band, which I thought was, in many cases, it was better for the band because, Georgia is maybe second to Texas as a band state, but I just didn't think it was pedagogically sound. I had students come and say, "Oh, I don't want to play an orchestra."
Yeah.
Excuse me? Kidding me? And the orchestra is terrific. So the top students make the rotation, and they switch between the wind ensemble and the orchestra for every concert. So I may have the same saxophone and euphonium players, but everything else switches per concert. And that's a careful what you wish for, scenario. But to me, the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. The wind ensemble just did CBDNA national, so that was a real thrill. And we tour. We believe in service, so we do a Sounds Across Georgia tour where we go into rural Georgia and give master classes and maybe give instruments away. I did that when I was at Cornell. We went to Costa Rica 6 times, gave away a lot of music instruments and gave a lot of lessons. And I took the Hudson Wind Ensemble to Panama last year to do the same thing. Then there's the Wind Symphony, which is conducted by my wonderful colleague Jacqueline Hartenberger. And then there's the Symphonic Band conducted by another wonderful colleague, Mike Robinson, who also does the Redcoat Marching Band, and Brett Baucom, who does the Redcoat Marching Band as well. Terrific. Couldn't ask for a better team. And then I get to do Rotahund music, which is fantastic. So I'm very, very blessed.
Yeah, it sounds like a terrific program. I'm really intrigued by this idea of service with the band. Is there more information that I can point listeners to?
You could probably go to the website, bands.uga.edu. We have some information about the Panama tour there and also the Sounds Across Georgia tour. That idea was, like a lot of people who get into service and service learning, you sort of stumble headfirst into it, tripping over your own feet. When I did it at Cornell, it was because my cousin, who has retired there, she does a lot of community work, and she found a school that had 20 kids and 5 instruments, and did I have any ideas? And so I put it to the Cornell students. I always believe in touring. That was my master's thesis: ensemble, personal and ensemble transformation on the band tour. And talk about community building and student leadership. Wow. And leaving the safe harbor, really important stuff. So that first tour that we did at Cornell, we took 50 instruments. The Cornell kids went to their former band directors, orchestra conductors, synagogues, churches, and just said, we're doing this project. I partnered with a local music store who did the repairs for free, which is also happening in Georgia. And off we went. And I had this impression that we were going to go to this developing country and do this wonderful thing. And within 10 minutes, you realize that's not how it works. Not at all. You're the one getting the most out of it. And it's life-changing. It really is. I guess everything's life-changing, but it really is transformative in how one looks at the world. And of course, the gift of music matters too, and sharing that. We've all done that on band tours.
Yeah.
but the teaching is another aspect of it. A lot of the students at Georgia want to teach, and I believe that as a performance major, you should know how to teach, and as an education major, you should know how to perform, and do both extremely well. And so, before we went, we had, a bit of Spanish lessons, but also here's how to do a masterclass.
Right. So you mentioned earlier, Cindy, that you talked about fear on the podium and sort of how you got into conducting. What sort of lessons do you have from the podium that you'd like to share, if you could distill some wisdom down?
We've already touched a little bit on it, and that is being authentic. I have seen a lot of young composers try to be someone or something else other than who they are or are going to be on the podium, and it's see-throughable within 30 seconds, so don't do it.
Yeah.
I am conducting less and less. By that I mean I'm off the box a lot more than I have been. I'm less concerned than I used to be with how I look, and much more concerned with what I hear and how I relate to my fellow human musicians in the same room.
Yeah.
And so if I had to, because you're making me answer this question, distill some wisdom, that would be I wish I had got to this place a little sooner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still care about being the music and being inspiring physically and emotionally, maybe even spiritually, but I care more that they can do it without me.
Well, empowering others is ultimately the goal.
Right. That's great leadership, right? They did it, or we did it ourselves.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. When I look back on the people who meant the most to me, they're the ones who made me feel that I could do it.
Right on.
Not the ones who showed me how to do it.
Yeah.
So, Cindy, one of the things that we talked about before I started recording was the idea of gender in the band world. And I think there's an urgent need for us to have a conversation. You're certainly a role model in your position for other women in music. And so I was hoping we could open that conversation.
First of all, this is timely.
It is.
The conversation is happening more and more and louder and louder. There were at least 3 sessions at CBDNA National Conference on this broad topic of gender and underrepresented composers, for instance. It was gender in composing. Music for All has asked me and others to what can they do to help the situation, and so I'm part of a growing conversation and action, more importantly, that's happening with that organization. We're seeing more and more articles pop up through social media, but also in the New York Times and other major outlets about this situation. So I don't think it's controversial. I used to ignore this topic, Mark. I used to not want to talk about it because, first of all, I'm a woman, and so why do I have to talk about it? Why don't men talk about this? Bill, they don't, because they're in a place of privilege, frankly, and they don't think about it. And I didn't want to talk about it because you don't want to get the label.
Right. No. Yeah, I understand.
She's a pissed off feminist, or don't hire her because she's trouble, or all of her research is going to be on gender, blah blah blah. For all the reasons, all the white noise reasons that we hear about. I didn't want to talk about it, but I've had enough personal experiences where I've sort of thought, really, did he just say that, or did that just happen? Yeah. And I'm also now in a place of privilege. Let's not lie about that. Where I'm a tenured professor at a major university, I do not take that lightly. But I'm in a position where I can speak my mind and do my research and not be afraid of the consequences. Hopefully,
I think that's important. I think that it's important that you do. In your position, you have that opportunity to be a role model to help and to affect change, I think.
I don't think we have to look at it as us, them, either or. There are a lot of wonderful men out there. You're obviously one. My husband, I know many who get it. who understand the bias, understand that they have bias, and that women have bias. This has now been proven again and again that we all have gender and racial biases. And to openly talk about it and have the conversation, and more importantly, put some things in place that create action to solve the problem. It's not going to be solved overnight, but the conversation and the small actions leading to bigger actions are certainly a good starting point. So it's very timely, and it's wonderful. Things are happening. These kind of things snowball. And I just saw something on Facebook where Stacey Garup, a woman composer, put on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it. That who are your favorite? Hey, Hive Mind. What are your favorite wind band compositions?
Right. I did see that.
Right. 55, 60 responses. Not one woman. And then she put another post, a follow-up, that said, "Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Any women composers out there?" And then a whole bunch of oh gosh, yeah. Here's a whole list of composers. But as Courtney Snyder pointed out, isn't it a shame that she had to actually say that?
It is a shame. And what's a shame is that I'm in this world. I've met lots and lots of composers, and I struggle to come up with many. I have many I can list, but it's a small list comparatively. Yeah.
Well, one of the young men who was part of that thread, I said, it would be a great service if you put this list together. And he not only put the list together with the compositions, but made a YouTube page so that we could go listen to them. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I'm going to go find that, and I'll make sure I try to link that if I can.
That would be great, because it's a wonderful service he's done, and it's on a Google Doc that you can edit and add.
Oh, cool.
And so we can just all crowdsource and be part of that, and it's terrific.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. So what advice would you give to, say, a young female composer? I know one of the things we talked about is that many young women feel like that avenue's closed in the band world, or maybe that at some point something's put in front of them that closes it off.
One of the things we have to be aware of in not just the band world, but the world, is that women pay a tax when they self-promote and are assertive. Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
They are labeled differently than when men self-promote. They're pushy, or they're just less likable when they self-promote, and when they're assertive, and even when they're successful. So that road has to be tread carefully and cleverly. At the same time, we talked about this. We tend to underestimate our own talents and abilities more than men. We tend to not take professional risks. Men mentor men. Mm-hmm. Men hire men.
Yeah.
It's the proverbial old boys network. And we're taught at a young age to worry about family more than men are. So there's so many things that are barriers to be broken through.
Now, I'm going to ask this question kind of selfishly, because as a college professor, as someone who's a composer in the band world, what can I do as a man? Let's say I have a female student. Can I do anything beyond just be as encouraging as possible?
You could show her this list.
Yeah, of course.
You could show her the YouTube links. You could contact all of the publishers from your point of view as a composer and say, why aren't we listing more female composers? Mm-hmm. You could contact the publishers of the method books, who have a lot of pictures of men playing trumpet instead of young girls playing tuba trumpet. You could invite all of your guest composers that you invite, could be women. If you can't afford to do that, Skype them in. Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff.
Right. Well, I'd like to hear this.
Yeah, you can have symposiums where you listen to women's music, and you don't say it's music by women composers. It's just music by composers that you admire.
That's something too, is that we have to attach this adjective to it.
Sure. Marin Alsop talks about that a lot. How we're in a world as women still where we're a lot of firsts, right? The first director of bands, it's a woman at UGA. Marilyn, that was the first woman who conducted the Pops concert. When are we going to get to the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth? She talks about having woman in front of conductor when it comes to her all the time, and she's hoping for the day when that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I studied with the first woman Pulitzer Prize winner.
There you go.
Did you read the article that Sarah Kirkland Snyder just wrote?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's a wonderful article.
New Music Box is a great resource. The other one I read there, Ellen McSweeney is another author who writes very interesting things there. Yeah, that's a great article on. I think it's in that article where she points out that no, it wasn't that article, but she alludes to it that it's very freeing when you just give up this problem. When you just say, this is not my problem. It's not my problem that I'm Black. It's not my problem that I'm a woman. It's not my problem that I'm Latino composer. And if you're able to do that, it's incredibly freeing.
Yeah, it really spoke to me because she didn't frame it, and I don't know how I want to put this in the way, but it spoke to me a great deal because she presented it as sort of the universal problems, and then from each universal problem, she then went to the specific problems that she faced. And that was really powerful because it became deeply personal.
Personal matters, it was a great article. And I'm going to read it again now that you've reminded me of it. But there's a couple more on there. Check out Ellen McSweeney. She writes a lot of stuff too. And Mara Gibson writes on this topic a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly something that I would like to see change. I would certainly want to see more young female composers, young female conductors. I want to try to empower them as much as possible. And so anything that we can do.
Yeah. I went through my list.
I think you're absolutely right, though. Just talking about it, playing the music, not putting the adjective on it. These are all really actionable things that we can do right now.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of talking about composers, and I know that you really value new music with your ensembles. It comes across in your social media. So what is your experience working with composers, and what are you looking for a composer to bring?
Yeah, I think in my next bio I'm going to put Cynthia is an advocate of old music. It's so ubiquitous now, isn't it?
It is. It's become a little bit trite in its overuse.
Of course, we're advocates of new music. I think that the band world, of course, we all know, does that very well. But you know what we don't do very well, Mark, is replay the music that we think was really hot and quality that we commissioned 20, 30, 40 years ago or last year. We don't do that enough. And I know that that's hard to hear as a living composer, but we are so in love with the new, and by we, I say me. I mean, I love new music, of course. Right. Very exciting to produce, to put into the world fresh ink on paper, to put that into sound is just incredible. That's incredible, right? But we are not really good in the band world of recreating and coming back to the pieces that we had a really good time with, and because it was quality. And by the way, going back to it, we might find even more in it. Of course we will, if it's quality. It's
interesting because we have maybe 25, 30 pieces that are considered the standards. And then beyond that, it's all churn, churn, churn.
I think that, the orchestra world, their list is a little bit longer. I don't want to hear anymore that we're a younger medium. I mean, hello, Gabrielli. Right. But we are sort of a younger medium in the sense of the instrumentation that we have now. So, of course, our list is a little bit shorter, and people are now more reluctant to make these lists for obvious reasons. Lists can be defining, and they can also be limiting. I'm not sure if you asked me my list if I could put 25. I think it'd be way over that.
No, I think that was probably an underestimate on my part.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, that's people ask all the time, "What's your top 10 list?" It's one of my graduate It's one of my questions on my audition list for graduate conductors. I have to rethink that, don't I? To get actually back to your original question, the very exciting thing about working with living composers is that you're working with living composers.
Right.
And you're interacting with them, and the students can see that this is art in the making, and fresh and vibrant and exciting, and they're part of it. That to me is priceless.
Let's bring this sort of down to the high school level. Do you have a couple of pieces that you would recommend for maybe, let's say, a middle level high school, not the top ensemble, not the bottom, but sort of like that grade 3.5, 4 middle average high school, of new music that maybe challenges the musicians in the audience a little bit that you'd recommend?
I've lately been doing a lot of honor bands where the music is sort of grade 5 and 6, so I've had to do some research on that sort of 3, 4 level. It's been a while since I've done that level of music. I just came across a composer named Joni Green, who wrote a wonderful piece that's doable. She says grade 4, and I think it's probably maybe grade 3, but it's in 5/8, called Enigma Machine, which I think is really clever and quite good. And Adolphus Hailstork's American Garnica. Do you know that piece?
No, I don't.
It's a 6-minute perfect piece that was written in 82, I think, but it was in response to the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 girls were killed. Julie Giroux just wrote a piece.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, in response to that as well. That piece by Hailstork is, I did it first at Eastman years ago. I did it this year at Georgia. I just did it with Vermont All-State. It's incredible. It's an incredible piece. You can hear the audience crying in the middle of it. It's perfect. It's 6 minutes. Most pieces, I think, are too long. This is just perfect. And it introduces the students to so much. I mean, leaving aside the message, it introduces them to aleatory and musical quotes and different kind of melodies. It's just a wonderful piece, and an American composer. That's also wonderful.
Yeah, I'd like to see more music like that programmed in the high schools. But I was talking with my students, and I teach Theory 4 to them, and we talk about 20th century techniques. And we were talking about this, and most of them are going to be high school, middle school band and choir directors.
I know a composer. I'm talking to one right now who could write a piece.
I know. Well, I could for sure. And I thought about it. I'm really interested in adding technology to middle grade pieces.
Yeah, I was going to say Michael Colgrass too wrote some pieces. He's the one who said every composer should be forced to write a young band piece or music for young musicians. Because with all of those limitations, I mean, it's really hard, right? It's really hard to write quality music. We all know that. The trumpets don't go above G in the staff, and clarinets aren't over the break, the third clarinet part, that kind of stuff. So he wrote some pieces with aleatory, but I'd love to see more extended techniques and aleatory for younger bands and technology. If we're going to get into technology, that's one of my other interests. I mean, I don't know if you know, I was a Google Glass Explorer, a beta tester for that. So
cool. When
I was at Cornell, but it led in all sorts of directions, not the least of which was a digital music stand, which I think we're also going to be beta testing that in the fall if I get the grant, which is looking positive. So that's good. But what I started to do at Cornell was project the score. I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier. All I do is put the score in a PDF with the composer's permission and put it in Fourscore, which is the most intuitive app that I've found on my iPad, and project the score behind me. It's completely changed how I rehearse. Completely. It's much more engaging. I mean, if I'm speaking to the clarinets, I can say to the trumpets, look at the score, see how they're doing, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. I can zoom in. I can have guide at the side. I can have one of the students work the iPad and zoom in and circle things. I mean, it's just It's really fantastic. And I don't know why we don't. I mean, the choral people do this. They have full score in front of them all the time.
Yeah. Boy, I think about how terrific that would be for young musicians because, you're so myopic when you're a kid because you're worried about just playing your instrument. And so to be exposed to the larger picture from an earlier age, they may not get it from day one, but over time.
I can just hear David Whitwell now. Music is an oral art. Don't make it a visual art, but it really does something different to the ensemble. And you don't have to have it there all the time.
Well, we ask the students, listen across the ensemble, listen to what this instrument's doing, but to see it up there and to put it up on the board and to say, hey, look, so here's what you're listening for. Do you see it?
Yeah.
I think that reinforces it because, that's why we take oral skills when we first get to college as music majors, is to the ability to kind of visualize what we're hearing in our mind.
Yeah, and let's face it, the majority of learners are visual learners.
Right, and I wish that I had that when I was a 7th grader.
Yeah, I mean, we can opine all we want that music is an oral art. Of course it is, but there's some people who don't learn that way. They learn by seeing it, and as you say, to reinforce it. It's just so much more efficient, but it's also really good teaching.
I think so too. I think that's a terrific idea.
Thanks.
I want to try it.
Yeah. Well, I can give some. I'm giving a talk on it at Music for All, but I'm considering just putting it up somewhere so more people can do it because it really does change everything. The other thing it does, Mark, too, is it gets away from this paradigm that I'm really tired of too, of me on a box with a stick telling them what to do, when to do, and how to do it. You let them in on the secret. Here's the score. In a place like Georgia, where they're doctoral students in performance, they have ideas that might be different, better than mine. Why not share them if they can see the big picture? Why are we the only ones with the secret? And why can't you do that in middle school?
Well, one of my questions that I put on my list of questions for you was, what advice would you give to your younger self? Do you think that would be it?
Yeah, that would be one, for sure. But, we didn't have that technology back when I was teaching
right.
School, but I certainly could have photocopied the score with permission of the composer or publisher, of course, right? So.
Sure. All right, Cynthia, one of the hardest questions in the interview is, what's your favorite work for wind ensemble and band?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and therefore must be true, is Music for Prop. That's a monumental, incredible piece of art, and it's the first thing I'm not sure it's the first thing that came to mind because it's on other people's lists, or I just did it last year and it was incredibly moving, or Carell just recently died and he was a neighbor when I lived in Ithaca. I have no idea why it came to my head, but it's certainly up there.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a terrific piece.
Yeah. Just one?
Oh, you can give me more.
I think... No, I'm just going to give one.
Okay. And that's fine. I think it's really difficult to limit it to one, but I think it's important that you have something. I mean, I often imagine, what would be the last thing I'd want to conduct?
Ooh, what is that? You have to share now.
Well, it actually, it's a story about that director in college who touched me. He passed away from cancer while I was at school there. And before he passed away, he mentioned to the ensemble that the last piece he wanted to do was the band transcription of William Walton's Crown Imperial.
Uh-huh.
And so he wanted to conduct it and then give the bow and then expire off stage. And so when he did pass away, at the memorial concert, we played it. And it was one of the 3 or 4 peak experiences of my musical career that I'll never forget. So that piece always makes me cry when I hear it.
Oh, yeah, what a great story. But that is a great piece. I mean, he picked a good one.
It is a good piece. And talking about pieces we don't really play because they're older, but, the idea of transcriptions and the value of transcriptions, there is value there. Even as a composer who I want to sell my music, I still feel like we should expose students to these great works.
Oh, absolutely. I had on my list to do this year, I took it off, as the Patterson transcription of Rite of Spring.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's still on my possible to-do list. But, yeah, I think there was an era there not too long ago where a lot of people were allergic to transcriptions or with their nose in the air said, there's so much wonderful new music for band, why would I play a transcription? And I confess I was in that camp for a while, but not anymore.
it's really hard. It's hard because it's, like I said, I'm a composer. I want people to play my music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this goes back to opportunity and gender and race. And what I always say on this podcast is that, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Right. Of course. And I mean, just because you want to promote composers who happen to be women doesn't mean your career is going to suffer. In fact, your career could take off. Right.
Right. Well, of course, because it's all about, oh boy, this is a big topic. It's about being kind to other people and doing the right thing. That's what people remember.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've heard this time and time again, and it's been proven, the most incredible musicians that I've met have been the most humble and the most kind. And they're the ones that get the call back. They're the ones that make lasting relationships that matter. They're the ones we remember. So it's what you say is very true.
Yeah, that's what I love the most about the band world.
Yeah.
It's a very kind and friendly, for the most part, community.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Yeah, me too. Okay, well, we've gone for a while now. So is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
I'm very excited about the upcoming season for the Wind Ensemble. We're doing a lot of interesting music, but in different ways. So I'll just say that I'm more, as we touched on in the interview, I'm more and more interested in the how of concert presentations more than the what. Of course, the what matters, but how we present it, I think, is becoming more and more interesting. So I'm really excited about the upcoming quote-unquote season. And what else is coming up? I mean, in the summer, University of Hawaii conducting symposium. There's still one slot, and I'm doing that. I've never been to Hawaii, so that's the second week of June. So if people want to come to Hawaii and get a conducting symposium and figure out their authentic self and do it in Hawaii, that would be cool. And I'm doing the New England Band Directors Institute, and that's second weekend of July, I think, or third weekend of July, and that looks really, really very cool.
So, Cindy, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
I would like to say what an honor to be asked to do this by you, in the sense that you think I have something of value to say. But also I want to compliment you on the idea, and not just having the idea, but seeing it through. There's a lot of people that have great ideas, and there's a whole subset of them that actually make it happen. That's the hard part, and you're doing it. And I think that this is a great idea, and who knows where it can lead. So bravo to you.
Oh, well, I thank you so much. And thank you for coming on. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.
I look forward to many conversations in the future.
Indeed.